Welcome back, darlings, to the podcast Life Looks Different Now. I'm your host, Slandy Noel. In this podcast, we focus on reading one chapter from the Bible every week, doing our best to decipher the Word of God, learning its rules, its laws, its principles, and apply them to our daily lives. Last week, we read from Genesis chapter 37. And from reading Genesis chapter 37, we learned that Jacob had a favorite son named Joseph. And we learned that Jacob loved that son so much so that he differentiated between his special son Joseph from his other brothers. He even made a special coat of many colors for Joseph. But something tragic happened at the end of the chapter. We learned that Joseph was so hated by his brothers that they wanted to kill him. But in the end, though, they did not kill him. Instead, they sold him into slavery. Now, this week, we are going to read Genesis chapter 38. It is a very fascinating chapter. So I hope that you stay tuned in with me and read this chapter. And let's do our best to decipher exactly what the word is telling us from this chapter. Now, before I go ahead to reading Genesis chapter 38 with you, I have a favor to ask. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. As you and I are learning the Word of God, others want to do the same. Give them the gift of knowledge by helping this channel to grow and sharing the message with others. Thank you in advance for your support. Now let's get on to reading Genesis chapter 38. Judah and Tamar. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went in to her, and she conceived and bore him a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Shezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he went into his brother-in-law's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up," for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his shear bearers, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And when Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is going to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's garment and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him into marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me come in to you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" He answered, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." And she said, "If you give me a pledge until you send it." He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her and went in to her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of widowhood. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, "Where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim at the roadside?" And they said, "No cult prostitute has been here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." Also, the men of the place said, "No cult prostitute has been here." And Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she's pregnant by immorality." And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "By the men to whom those belong, I am pregnant." And she said, "Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah identified them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." And he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, "What a breach you have made of yourself." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Well, chapter 38 is a very fascinating story. Listen, it's one of those chapters that I'm pretty sure many Christians are wondering, why is this chapter even included in the Bible, because there is so much going on in this chapter. It is a very fascinating chapter. Now we have to remember in Genesis chapter 37, the brother who gave advisement to all of Joseph's brothers to sell him into slavery was Judah. Judah was the brother, he was the son of Jacob, who actually decided that his brother Joseph should be sold into slavery. It was his idea to do that. You see, and what's interesting about this story is how, things are taking place. We see here that Judah left his father's home. He moved into a whole different area to have his own family, to build his own home and do his own thing. But what's interesting about this is how, even though they have been advised not to marry the Canaanite women, they continuously do it. These descendants of Abraham, they continue on being very stubborn. They are hard-headed men. They continue on marrying these Canaanite women. there must be something about these Canaanite women that keeps on attracting these men. So here we are, we're learning that Judah, the brother who sold his own younger brother into slavery, is living his own life, went up and he found a woman, a Canaanite woman named Shua, and he married her and went into her. We then learned that she became pregnant with their first son, She gave birth to And then she got pregnant again. She gave birth to Onan. And then she got pregnant again. She gave birth to Shelah and his youngest son. Then we learned that when became older, he got older, his father, Judah, took for him a wife. And I'm pretty sure maybe, the text doesn't say, but his wife's name is Tamar. It doesn't tell us if Tamar was a Canaanite woman as well. We just know that was of age, and Judah, his father, took a wife for him, Tamar. But interestingly enough, the text tells us that was wicked in the eyes of the Lord. Now, we don't know what has been up to. We don't know what he's done. But we know that the text is telling us that he is wicked. Maybe he has done, maybe he has committed, violence. Maybe he's just in his heart. He's just a very hard man. We don't know. We really don't know what the text means by him being wicked in the sight of the Lord. But we know he was wicked, so much so that God did not even bother allow him to live. God killed him, leaving Tamar a widow. Now we have to understand, a woman who is a widow around that time is a woman who is left without protection. Women needed to be under the protection of a male figure. If you are not married, you were under the protection of your father. And if you married, you are under the protection of your husband. But if you are a widowed woman, there's no one to protect you. There's no one to take care of you. There's no one to take care of your needs. So Tamar, poor Tamar, is now a widow with no one to take care of her. But there is a liberate, there's something called a liberate marriage, where if a woman becomes a widow and her husband if a woman becomes a widow without children and her husband has brothers, one of his brothers, has to marry the widow so she can have a child of her own. So she can have a child who, a son to carry the name, to carry, oh my goodness, to carry on the heritage of the brother who is now deceased. And it was very customary. It was important because if a woman doesn't have any protection, she doesn't have any care, it's very dangerous. That woman can be sold into slavery. That woman can be sold into prostitution. That woman is going to be destitute, dying of hunger because there's no one around to take care of her. It was the law that the second son now, who is Onan, has to fulfill his role as the brother-in-law and have children with Tamar. So, the older brother's family line can continue. And that was very, very important. So then we see here that Judah have decided to give the second son, Onan, to marry Tamar. And we read from the text that Judah specifically said to Onan, you need to marry your sister-in-law. So, so your brother, so you can have a child, so your brother can have a child, have an offspring through you. But that's not to say, even though it was customary, that firstborn son will carry out the lineage, the family line for the first brother. But, they could have, but whatever children that Onan and Tamar end up having afterwards will be their kids, will be considered Onan's child. However, it's pretty clear that Onan was not interested in that situation. Onan wanted to do what was best for Onan. Now, it didn't say here that Onan, objected to sleeping with Tamar. Not at all. In fact, clearly he took great joy in sleeping with this woman, taking advantage of this woman. He may not have wanted to fulfill his duty, but he wanted to enjoy her. So what did he do? He took her, slept with her, but then he made sure that he pulled out just in time so he does not, so his semen does not, the act of, he basically interrupt the act of conception. He's just making sure that his semen is spread to the ground and not where it needed to go, if you know what I mean. So Tamar would not conceive any child from this, encounter. So he was continuously having sex with her. He was enjoying Tamar. It goes to show that, yes, a man can sleep with you even if he doesn't like you. And I'm gonna keep on saying it because that's what happened, even when, when we are reading what happened with Jacob. And when he was sleeping with Leah, he hated Leah, but he enjoyed having sex with her. He enjoyed the pleasure she gave to him. That is what Onan was doing here. Apparently, Onan had no objections, to having sex with Tamar. However, he took great advantage of it. However, he was not interested in fulfilling his role. So he interrupted the whole situation right at the right moment so there won't be any conception. And then God took notice. God saw what Onan was doing. God saw that Onan was taking advantage of this poor widow who needed protection. And what did God do? God also killed Onan for his wickedness, because he was trying to avoid his responsibility of impregnating her to continue his brother's line. And God saw that as being wicked. He was wasting his semen. And God saw it as a heinous sin. God killed him. Now, that same Levirate custom demands that Judah now give the third son to that custom is now demanding that Judah give Tamar to the third son. So now the third son has to take on that responsibility to make sure that he helps, his brother's widow to get pregnant so they can carry out that family line, continue on that family line. But interestingly enough, the text is letting us know that Judah maybe became very concerned. Maybe he somehow blamed Tamar for the death of his two oldest sons. We don't know. Maybe he felt like Tamar was bad luck and he was concerned. He didn't want his youngest son to die, his youngest son Sheila to die the same way. So he told Tamar to go back to her father's home as a widow. And that was not right. It was not customary. As a widow, she had no business leaving at her father's household. It was their responsibility. It was Judah's responsibility and his son's responsibility to take care of this woman, and they knew it. But Judah did not care. He went ahead. He said to her, you go back home to your father's household, and when my son become of a certain age, the age of marriage, then he can marry you and carry out that Levirate custom. And what did Tamar do? She listened, just like the obedient woman she was, the obedient daughter-in-law she was. She listened. She went back to her father's household as a widow, covering herself, mourning the death of her husband, while she waits for Sheila to become of age to marry Sheila. But we know that Judah had no intention of marrying Sheila to Tamar because of his concern. So he basically had the intention of making this woman wait. Do you understand? He really intended on letting this woman wait, this childless widow, to wait in her father's household forever. And he knew that was not customary. He knew that was not safe for this woman. He knew that he was in putting her in danger. He knew that. He didn't care. So that's what he did. But then we learned that Tamar apparently was a very intelligent woman. She was a very intelligent woman. She realized that, Judah was not going to marry her to that youngest son. Because as time passes and she sees that this young man, Sheila, has grown and it was time for him to fulfill his duty, but she noticed that her father-in-law was not holding his end of the bargain. He was not taking responsibility for her. He was not marrying her off to the youngest son. And so what did she do? She took matters into her own hands. That's my kind of girl. Sometimes in life, you got to take matters into your own hands. You can sit around and lay back and hope for the best. We got to make moves. We got to make moves. And that's what she did. So when Tamar learned that her father-in-law, Judah, has recently lost his wife, and he was mourning the loss of his wife, but he was going to be traveling to go take care of his sheep because he had huge flocks and all of that. And she learned of that, and she realized that, okay, I have no prospect for marriage, because really it was her father-in-law who, Judah, who's supposed to take care of her and his sons, and they're not doing that. And she's like, there's no prospect for marriage here. God forbid. Like, what's going to happen to her? She was concerned. And she's like, there's no provision. There's no protection. So what am I supposed to do? So she hatched this scheme to force Judah's hand into caring for her. Very smart woman. Very smart woman. Then we learned that, someone mentioned to Tamar that Judah was going to be traveling to go and handle his business. He was a sheep bearer. And she knew exactly where he was going to be going to. So then she went ahead, she removed her widow outfit, and she put on the clothing of a prostitute. So that tells us that around, like in the biblical time, everyone could differentiate a normal woman, a respectable woman, from a prostitute, right? Clearly, prostitution was not illegal. It was normal. It was immoral, but that's what happened. And a lot of women did find themselves into that position, when they were left unprotected with no husband, or, if you don't have a man to take care of you, to protect you, many of these women had to turn into prostitution to take care of themselves. So this is what, this woman was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to have to do what I got to do. So she dressed herself up with a veil, appearing as a prostitute. So that tells us that prostitutes used to wear a certain outfit because, and she positioned herself along the side of the road at the entrance of the town called Enaim. So she knew, okay, if I position myself here, at the side of the road, as he's traveling, I can get his attention. Now, we don't know what Tamar's, really plan really was. I mean, this scheme could have gone the other way, right? But we know that she took a chance. Sometimes in life, you got to take a chance. You got to have faith. You have to have faith. Not knowing who she was, Judah saw her on the side of that road, and he said to her, I want to come into you. So we all understand what that means. A man has a tool, he has to penetrate a woman. And he said to her, I want to come into you. And she said, okay, what do you propose? How do you propose to pay me? And what do you propose to pay me? And he said, I'll give you a small goat. I will send you a small goat as the fee, for your services. And as they're negotiating, she said, okay, if you don't have the small goat, that's fine. But guess what? I notice here that you have a staff in your hand. right? She's like, you have a staff in your hand, you have a signet in your hand here. Okay, so fine. I don't have any problem if you take care of business and then you pay me later, but I'm gonna hold on to, the staff, the signet, and the court as guaranteed that you are coming back to pay me. And these items apparently were unique, right? They had to have been unique and irreplaceable to Judah, because only Judah must have had these specific. So maybe it meant certain men of certain status around this time had certain signet, they had certain staff, they had certain things that really was their signature. It was unique to them, and clearly it was irreplaceable to Judah. And she said, I'll hang on to these items until you come back, return to pay me. And Judah accepted. He said, okay, no problem. And then he went into her. And then the word of God tells us, the Bible tells us, that she became pregnant. See, I know a lot of people today are having this huge discussion, especially now that we are in this election season, and many people are arguing, especially in regards to abortion laws that are happening, abortion bans that are happening all over the country, where people are. I've heard the argument of people saying that the baby is not really conceived until baby is born. That's when it's really a human. That's when it's really blah 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 and more blahs. But what we are learning here is that the minute the sperm reached the egg, that baby has been conceived. The text just tells us she laid with him, he came into her, she conceived, and then she went away. His sperm chased that egg, met that egg, she conceived. Do you understand? Because listen, God knew us, knows who you are even before you were conceived. Do you understand? So the argument that a baby is not a human being, is not a baby until they are born, they don't have any right, and so forth. I don't really want to get into these big arguments, but I can say that the word of God is saying it is otherwise. Like the minute that sperm reaches the egg, a baby is conceived. That's all I can say in the matter. Anyway, so she got up and she returned back to her father's house. She removed the prostitution outfit. She put her widowed outfit back on. She went back home to her father's house. And Judah went back to doing his business. Then we later on learned that Judah sent his friend, because Judah, of course, probably was embarrassed to come back and be looking for a prostitute. So then he later on sent his friend Ira to the place where he had met that said prostitute to pay her the fee, of course, and get his, and redeem his items so he can retrieve his items. And lo and behold, when Ira got there, looking around for that said prostitute, couldn't find her. And the men around the area said, there's never been a prostitute here. Because we all know that Tamar was not truly a prostitute. She was not an actual prostitute. She just had to play her role. And the truth is, this plan could have backfired. But yes, there was deceitfulness there, but clearly God's hand was in this as well. Please don't stone me for saying that, but it had, because if God didn't intend for this woman to get pregnant in that way, it would not have happened. Nevertheless, Ira went back to his friend. Ira went back to his friend and said to Judah, there's never been a prostitute in that area. The men said she doesn't exist. And then, of course, at that point, Judah is like, I better leave this alone and not try to investigate this any further, lest they laugh at me. I don't want anybody knowing about this behavior of my indiscretion. So he knew going into a prostitute was wrong. He knew it was immoral. He knew it was a sin. Okay? So he didn't want to be embarrassed. He didn't want people to make fun of him. So what did he do? He said, let's leave the matter alone, leave it alone. He decided to abandon his quest, to retrieve these items. And lo and behold, 3 months later, Tamar is discovered to be pregnant. So 3 months later, someone brought the news to Judah, because remember, Tamar is the daughter-in-law, and it really is Judah's responsibility to take care of her. And now every report, everything that's happening in her life, Judah has to be made aware of it. So then he's learning that Tamar has been discovered to be pregnant. Oh, she has been immoral. She has been she has been engaged in immoral acts, and now she's pregnant. Now she's a harlot. Now she's a whore, and she should be punished. And we are hearing here that Judah did not stop and think. He did not care about Tamar. Upon hearing that news, the first thing he said is, bring her out and burn her. Can you imagine? Burn this woman alive. Now, this is a woman, who is technically engaged to his youngest son. This is the woman his son's widow, who should have been protected and sheltered and cared for, and he failed to do that. And now here he is, quick to judge this woman. This is a man not too long ago who was sleeping with a prostitute. But upon hearing the news of his daughter-in-law being pregnant, he decided, she should be burned alive. As they are dragging this woman, and I cannot even imagine how terrified she was for her life, knowing that she's gonna be burned alive. But that woman was also brave. The audacity. I love it. She said, hold up, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. The person who that staff, that signet, and that cord belongs to is the person who got me pregnant. Stunning revelation. Tamar sent proof to Judah of the person who has impregnated her. Judah's own staff, signet, and cord are sent back to him. And then right then, Judah recognized his hypocrisy. And he said, wow, I've done this. He said, Tamar may have done something immoral, but, she may have done this, but it's really my fault because I should have given her to Sheila, to Mary, so this woman can have a child, so that, she can have protection and security and safety. And I felt her. And to make matters worse, I'm worse because I'm the one who went on and slept with her, thinking that she was a prostitute. So he realized that, listen, she may have been immoral, but Judah's sin was greater. His sin was as bad as hers. And he allowed her to live. Then the text tells us clearly he took care of her. He was the one who was performing the Levirate custom. Now he was the one, it was under his protection. Now Tamar was going to be protected, provided for, and cared for the rest of her days. But what I like about the text is, the text let us know that Judah never laid with her again. He realized, ooh, that woman is something else. He got played. He thought he was playing her, but she was smarter. But I love the fact that he respected her enough to say, you know what? I am not going to live with this woman again. And the text made it, known that he never had intercourse with her ever again. And Judah ended up taking care of her and performing his responsibilities, the Levirate marriage responsibilities, which he had denied Tamar for years. Then we learned that Tamar gave birth to twin boys. How beautiful is that? Now, the oldest boy, Zerah, the one who should have been the oldest, who put his hand out first, and they had placed a little red cord on his hand somehow. Maybe his brother Perez pulled him back in, and then the first baby that came out was Perez. It was a different baby, and we can see that this child was meant for something greater. And after Perez came out, the second child was born, and they named him Zerah. And interesting enough, you should know that Perez is really, he's going to be the young man that God is going to be using to carry out the messianic line, the line of Jesus Christ. It is very fascinating, to know that a man like Judah and a woman like Tamar, two immoral people, two people who have done wrong, who have, one sleeping with prostitute, the other one sleeping with brother-in-law, tricking father-in-law to do all that. Nevertheless, God used imperfect people to do his perfect plan, because Tamar is going to be part of that whole messianic line, and Judah is out of all the brothers, all the sons of Jacob, Judah is the brother that God has chosen to carry out that messianic line. And we're going to learn a little bit more about Judah in the next chapters to come. So I hope you have followed, you've been following me along, and you've read this with me, and you've stuck around to hear, my thought on it. So if you have any questions, concern, please leave them below. Let me know, what are your thoughts? Was this story an interesting story? It certainly was to me, because the one lesson I got from this is, like, sometimes, people may they're gonna try to play you. They're gonna try to play you like a fool. So you gotta learn to stand up for yourself. And sometimes you just gotta go out there and make it happen, and that's what Tamar did. And that's something that's a testimony to us all, because sometimes we think that because we should have something, we believe that we deserve it, so therefore it should be coming to us easy. Not everything in life comes easy. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you really have to put in that work and get it done, and that's what Tamar did. And I love that, Judah himself recognized his hypocrisy. We're not perfect. We are going to do certain things that are wrong. We're going to do certain things that are immoral. But sometimes God can use that for the good. So thank you again for tuning in this week, for listening to this, to this very fascinating, yeah, I know some people may feel like it's gross, but I find it to be a very fascinating story. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm praying for you this week. And I'm praying that you will get a chance to go back to many of the other chapters and learn something from them as well. I'm praying for you. I'm thinking of you. And I pray that God will bless you this week, and you will tune in next week for Genesis chapter 39. Thank you so much for your time and your support. Until next time, darling, bisous.